Okay, I think we will get started. So, welcome to everyone joining us from around the globe. And as we're getting started, I'd like to ask everyone to make certain you are muted. We're going to try leaving the video on. You can stop your video or keep it on, and we will spotlight all of our talkers as we continue. So, welcome to everyone joining us from around the globe. Today we are pleased to start our IACATE Fall 2021 season of events by hosting this global webinar examining decolonial perspectives in relation to learning and teaching, arts education, and children. I'm Phil Spicer. I'm the IACATE Interim Chair of Events, and I will be your host, along with Carol Beck Carter, who will be our facilitator and chair for today's event. IACATE, the International Association for Creative Arts in Education and Therapy, is a professional association promoting a global dialogue, particularly between South and North, East and West, about the role and practice of the creative arts in education and therapy. IACATE supports the development of the creative arts in a wide range of fields, including education, therapy, healthcare and wellness, performing arts, and other allied professions. IACATE supports the professional role of creative arts practitioners across the globe who are committed to a body-mind-spirit continuum that advances humanity and the planet. We are a growing community with individual membership and also over 20 partner arts organizations from around the world. And if you would like more information, please visit our website. You can just Google IACATE, where you will also gain access to our open access journal, Creative Arts in Education and Therapy. Today's global webinar will be divided into two parts: the book launch of Dr. Theresa Magdalen Giorza, her new book, Learning with Damaged Colonial Spaces, Posthumanist Pedagogies from a Joburg Preschool. We're delighted that she's with us and will join Dr. Carol Beck Carter in a discussion about her new book. The second part, our distinguished panel of arts educators from South Africa and Australia will join Teresa and Carol and continue their conversation and exchange of ideas. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carol Beck Carter, our chair for today's webinar. She is a senior lecturer in arts and early childhood education at Curtin University in Perth, Australia. She is the IACATE Regional Director for Australia and New Zealand, and her research interests include equity, social justice, cultural and linguistic diversity, drama and arts education, arts-based research, and early childhood learning. So please keep your screen on mute, everyone, as we welcome Dr. Carol Beck Carter. Thank you.
Right, welcome everyone. I just want to add my welcome to what Philip has said on behalf of the IACATE regional area. We have a really great committee that's fairly new in this role. Quite a few people from Australia in all of the arts. We're still a little short on the New Zealand side. We've managed to get one person onto our committee at our last meeting, but anyone out there that's from New Zealand especially, but even those who are not from New Zealand and you're interested in joining, we're really always looking for other people. Now, I would like to just acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I have been very happy to be adopted. My adopted land, which is Australia, particularly the Awabakal people on whose land I am currently living, and also the Wajak Nyunga people, who I'm hoping to work in their land a little more. I'm sort of stuck in New South Wales, but on my way to Curtin University. I've already started working there online, but in person. And then I also pay my respects to the arts therapists and educators working in the land of my birth, South Africa, and honor them for the tremendous work they are doing in very challenging circumstances and situations. Now today, as Philip said, the first thing is the launch of this great book by Teresa. I was very, very excited when Warren Neebe asked me to curate this evening, because the book has all sorts of links to my own work, including, working and growing up in South Africa, the arts, early childhood. And I was even more excited when I began to read the book, because it is just an enormously rigorous and really great piece of work. So those of you who haven't had a chance to actually read it, please do so, because it is really, and I'm not paid to say this, it is an amazing, amazing piece of work. Now, Teresa Giorza is a researcher and teacher in childhood studies with a special interest in arts-based pedagogies and philosophical inquiry with children. She received the AERA, or ERA Dissertation Prize, from the Critical Perspectives in Early Childhood Education, SIG, in 2019. She is based at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, in the School of Education Foundation Studies Division. And in order to launch this book, I looked at the foreword, and I'm not going to read the entire foreword, but there is, I think, no better way of actually introducing this book than to just read a little bit from this foreword. So Teresa's book is a deeply entangled political and personal story of unlearning privilege by becoming with damaged colonial spaces. Staying with the complexity and the living contradictions of this position, first as powerless child and later vulnerable women in a violent society, Teresa's stories are filled with hope for the existence of other possible educational worlds. The picture landscape of the place where Teresa now lives and works is bleak. Originally from Zimbabwe, she paints an honest picture of how her present home, South Africa, has struggled to rebuild a country scarred by centuries of colonial exploitation. Despite promises to the contrary by various governments, deep inequalities continue to worsen. And the reasons for these are varied and complex, including the intentionally inferior Bantu education system for Black South Africans, which was the historical legacy of apartheid. The current education system is also multi-tiered and inequitable, a government system largely for the poor, but with a smallish number of quality schools for the middle and upper middle classes, and an upmarket independent system for the rich. A large number of children do not attend school at all, and those who do, and who sometimes live in poverty and attend school hungry, are often victims of corporal punishment, sexual abuse, or mental humiliation. Such inequalities between the rich and the poor have severely worsened since the COVID-19 pandemic. Teresa's art background performs a critical role in her investigations, a powerful transdisciplinary blend of educational science and the creative arts. Her knowledge of contemporary art is important, not so much to teach art to children, but to approach the everyday with an artistic and philosophical attitude. As an inheritor of colonial white privilege, Her own subjectivity is entangled with her writing, not only from her experiences as a teacher in high school, a government official, a lecturer at university, an activist in the non-government sector, an arts maker of things, a resident of the inner city suburb where the research was situated, but also and especially as an academic researcher. Her research offers a fresh perspective on the current decolonization debate, which is often restrictively reduced to identity politics. Inspired by Karen Barad's gentle realism, she disrupts unilinear notions of time and progress. Decolonizing public spaces involves not only changing ownership and inherited entitlements, but also the need to include ethical and political discussions about the deep institutionalized inequalities between children and adults. These injustices that have enabled narrow, human-centered education also sustain the kind of learning that privileges culture over nature, adult over child, and human over non-human. Children have been historically excluded and dismissed as not being fully human fellow citizens or co-producers of knowledge. Through careful and detailed analysis of example, the book explores how children can be included in the decisions that affect learning, not as discrete individual entities, but always already engaged and intricately connected with other human and non-human becomings. Teresa's writing manages to make you think and do research differently without moralizing or pointing the finger. On the contrary, she very movingly expresses her vulnerabilities as researcher women. She is not a researcher who parachuted into this working class, mostly Black community to collect her data. Living in the same community herself, the stories she tells are profound, deeply political, brutally honest, realistic, and compassionate. She paints a down-to-earth picture without sentimentality or romanticizing what it is like to live and work in the preschool. The reality of doing research in countries where there is extreme poverty might be familiar to researchers in the South, but is a profound revelation for academics working in the North, where there are little or no such inequalities. Childhood research from the South is rare, but research situated in the South by a researcher from the South that renders Black children living in severe poverty capable by paying attention to the tiny, intricate details that matter is a unique addition to this book series. This book gives tremendous cause for hope during these extraordinary times of a pandemic that is sweeping the world and deepening the inequalities between the poor and the rich, made worse by the digital divide. The timing of this book is perfect considering the international trend of pouring more funds into the early childhood sector. The book is not only informative about early year provisions in a country like South Africa, but the reader will also find it resonates with their own contexts as the challenges to offer alternatives to developmental approaches to early years education are increasing on this global agenda. So with that in mind, I thank Teresa most sincerely and thank her for the privilege of sharing this conversation with her tonight. So we will kick off with some questions that I'm going to ask Teresa, and then hopefully it will turn into more of a conversation. So Teresa, are you ready?
Hi, Carol. Yes, ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. Sorry, I seem to suddenly have got a cough tonight. All right. So Teresa, first, yeah, thanks. Give me some water.
Pouring for you.
The first question is, tell me a little bit about your journey and experiences that led to this publication, and also a little bit about the theoretical frameworks that underpin your work.
Thanks very much. And thank you for introducing and reading that rather glowing foreword written by can I say mentor? She was my PhD supervisor, Professor Karen Murris from Oulu University in Finland. She worked with me in Johannesburg and then in Cape Town, and is now in Finland. And why I'm saying this is that really this book is the result of all these relationships, and I'm sure I'm quoting both Karen Barad, who I draw on quite a lot in the book, Karen Barad, but also Deleuze and Guattari at the beginning of their incredible incredible book, The Thousand Plateaus. You know, they say that they were already a crowd. They wrote the book together, but they were already a crowd. And Karen Barad says, well, you know, who has constituted this author and this book? So really it's a multitude, and I'm glad that some of you who are mentioned in my acknowledgements are with us here today. So yeah, let's celebrate you know, this production that really is, I suppose it's a bit like a drama performance, which is, you know, it can't happen without relationships. So that's by way of beginning, really trying to acknowledge all the energies and the people and the things and the whatever came together to make this book, and hopefully it has makes some ripples in the world and inspires other people to write, and I'm sure more people from the South will be writing, and you know, hopefully those voices become more prominent. So yes, so the journey to get to write this book really was about meeting Karen Malone through a research project that I was part of, which was started by Karen Murris. The research project was funded by the South African Research Foundation. The title of it is the Decolonizing Early Childhood Discourses. And you can visit their website. It's ongoing, it's very vibrant, and it includes people from all over the globe. And I met Karen Malone, and she invited me to submit a book proposal to her series. So this book is part of a bigger series called Children, Global Posthumanist Perspectives and Materialist Theories. And it's edited by Karen Malone, who is from Australia. I'm sure, I don't know if you know her, she's in environmental education. And the other editors are Marek Tessar from New Zealand and Sonia Arendt, also from Australia. And the interest really was to try and get a global picture and find a range of voices of people grappling with issues of colonization, of you know, climate justice, human and non-human issues that face us on the planet at the moment, and how those impact and have reverberations and have meaning for people working with young children. So really my own journey, you could say, and maybe I can share my screen. I've got some images to kind of help me to not go off the point too much. I'm sure you appreciate that somebody, oh, I thought it was going to be waiting for me here. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Can you see it? Can you see it?
All good. All good.
Okay. You know, somebody who's taught art history and the arts, it helps to have images. to talk to. And this is myself at 1 year old on a holiday with my family in Durban in 1961. And I use it in the book in various ways, but I think, you know, in 1961, that was the year that Patrice Lumumba was murdered in the DRC, and that story comes out later in the book where I talk about mining in Johannesburg and the uranium in the dumps and the whole history of the Cold War and South Africa's involvement there. So I think, you know, an important thread is that, you know, all those movements of liberation and emancipation from earlier, from, you know, the 60s, 70s, are really trying to find ways to live and pay attention to these issues of justice. You know, and importantly, you know, people like Paulo Freire drawing attention to the fact that we read the world before we read the word. And I think that's a strong part of the book. It's about learning as worlding. It's about making connection in ways other than through language. So the materialist ontology, which, you know, for people working in the arts, it's something that I think a lot of people have known in their bones, but you know, our theoretical frameworks have always been so human-centered that, you know, like, for example, the phenomenologist point of view is definitely about the connection between inside, outside, using our senses to connect with the world and respond to the world. But I think what the posthumanist position brings is a kind of a decentering. So to try and notice much more carefully what our human impact is, you know, on and with the world that we're engaging with. So yeah, yeah, I acknowledge in the book that I'm part of a swarm. I'm part of a whole colonial project, and the story of mining is a big one, but it connects with the small stories, the small pedagogical details that I encounter in this preschool in the inner city. And that's the challenge, is to get a sense of how the micro and the macro work together, how the pasts and the presents and the futures are all enfolded in one another. I don't know if that goes some way to answering your question. I've got some of the other images. I used some images from South African photographers to try and bring to light the complexity of the history and the way that the legacy that we inherit is still so much part of our current story.
Sorry,
yeah.
Can you just go back to that slide and just translate that for the Australians?
Okay. Mandela, apartheid is nog nie klaar nie. Mandela, apartheid is not finished yet. And this was in 1994. So, and it's as true today, I'd say. There are layers and layers of apartheid legacy that still need to be undone and revisited and reworked, and yeah. This image is so powerful for me because it is the same park that the preschool that I worked at adjoins the park, and it's changed quite a bit over the years, but it is the exact same park. And the story here, what the links I tried to make are about there I am in this park today with young children. 20 or so years earlier, almost 30 years now, I, as a child, could have been in that park, but the current children would not have been there. The only Black people allowed in that park would have been the minders of the white children. This person, this Black woman, would have had a stamp in her passbook that would have allowed her to work in a white area. And if she had been stopped by the police, she would have needed to produce that pass to prove that she actually had a right to be in this part of her own country. So in effect, it was citizens. If you were Black, you carried a passport in your own country. And if you infringed that law, you would end up in jail, and you would, I mean, yeah. So you would have been made a criminal in a sense for being in the wrong place at the wrong time without the correct official stamp in your passport. So there's, in this picture, you know, you kind of sense the layers, the history, the official kind of the way the law worked, and I made connections then between the regimentation of the school, you know, the routines and the rigidity of the way that schools run, with the order of parks, the order of these laws that separated people, and the order of the prison that kept the entire system kind of in place. But I unraveled that story with other images, and I draw on a photographer, the work of a photographer from the DRC, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This photograph he calls footprint, which shows the surface of the ground where you can see there's been some serious disruption. There's a fire, there's ash, there's a playing card with Washington's face on it. There's a banknote, a chicken feather, and I use this image also in the book, because I actually worked with this image in a philosophy, an inquiry with some activists in Lubumbashi in the Congo. But the important thing is that this picture kind of gave me a way to, I started taking photographs of the surface of the ground around the preschool and in the park, because what emerged when we used this photograph in an inquiry was the focus went to what was beneath the ground. So the surface of the ground drew our attention to the fact that, you know, beneath the ground in the DRC is this incredible wealth, but because of, you know, geopolitical power balances, currently the people of the DRC are some of the poorest people on the entire globe. So those ironies that were made visible through using images, and in a way it's what's invisible in this picture that becomes important. And that's the other big big move I mentioned was kind of trying to go beyond language in research. You know, Karen Barad says language has been given too much power, and I think it's taking the legacy of the post-structuralists, you know, Foucault and Derrida and people like that, who were really trying to look inside and behind language for meaning, and what posthumanist researchers and a growing community of what is becoming known as post-qualitative researchers, what we're attempting to do is to try to go beyond representation, try to go beyond, you know, because even when you're using the visual arts, you can use the visual arts in a way that is more than a straight representation of one thing for another. It's actually using the visual to go beyond language, to find meaning in more material, more relational, more, it's like asking what an image can do, rather than what it is. So the move is against sort of essences and identities and descriptions, rather to how things work in the world, how things work with one another in relation. And those relations reveal ethical kind of responsibilities that one has. Yeah.
Thank you, Teresa. I think that makes it so much sort of clearer, and we're getting a good understanding of the sort of contextualization and the journey and all of those kinds of things. In addition to, I think you've kind of answered a bit of question 2 as well. So I'm not going to sort of move into that, and also because we need to sort of be aware of time as well. But thank you. I think that was a really comprehensive answer. And just to say to people who are listening, if you have any questions for Teresa, just put them in the chat, because we will have a time for questioning at the end when everything is complete. So I'm going to move on, and that was really, the sort of what's titled in your chapters, chapter 1, the setting off and all of those kinds of things, and then we sort of move to some of the others. So I'm going to go straight to chapter 3, if that's okay. And I'm going to ask you that question about the contagious interest in the shape of leaves and lips that you describe in chapter 3. If you can talk a little bit about that, as well as the significance of children's work, such as the camera-eating monster and those. So give us a little bit of some examples of the children and the work and so on. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so in moving beyond language, I think the real push is to appreciate ourselves as sensory beings that are, and we're part of this incredible world, and our senses enable us to respond, and we get drawn to things, we get attracted. Beauty is this incredible connector, and connects us emotionally or viscerally. And that's an important part of working in the arts, and particularly in early years, where children are meeting the world as newcomers, in a sense, with a fresh eye and an ability to reveal to us jaded, maybe people who've been around for a long time, can help us see things in a fresh way. So this whole idea of contagion is important, because I draw on some other authors who Paulina Rautio is one of them, who works in Scandinavia with young children, has written some lovely papers. One is called Children who Carry Stones in Their Pockets. The connection, with through our senses, is this connector, and the Reggio Emilia atelierista, Bea Vecchi, she writes very movingly about beauty as a connector. So the thing about the contagion is this idea that, well, do ideas and thoughts, do they dwell inside an individual's head? You know, this idea of cognitive science or cognitive-based education, where we're constantly trying to understand what are the structures that an individual can build, you know, in their mind, and we have schema, and then we have an experience that maybe undermines a particular schema, and then we remodel that structure, but it's all kind of going on in our own heads. So this idea of contagion is an idea where we say, actually, where do ideas reside? Perhaps they are actually between ourselves and the world. It's through our connection with something in the world that we get sparked. That's what brings a thought up. So this the leaf lips. Okay, that was, sorry. There's my friend with her leaf lips. We were in a forest, and she noticed that the shape of the leaves were lips, and look at the color, how perfect. So this was a contagious thought, and it kind of carried on through the day. I mean, we went swimming and we saw bubbles. The bubbles would kind of form faces, and that's a very powerful symbolic thinking with the world. And I know Kieran Egan talks about the fact that 5-year-olds are kind of as humans, when we're 5 years old, we are at the peak of our ability to use this kind of symbolic thinking. And it makes sense, because that's when we kind of start learning letters, and we associate letters with sounds, and we jump into the whole practice of reading and writing. But that important process of symbolic thinking and noticing how one thing represents another thing, you know, is this really important. I don't know if you can see, there's me with my leaf lips that I kind of imitated, or I caught the bug of the leaf lips idea. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean that is that whole kind of symbolic interaction that takes place with young children is so special, and you know, it is a time when the imagination that school sometimes kills is still alive and well and living and living in the universe. We've got actually, Teresa, we've got like 3 minutes. So instead of asking you another question, I think if anything else you want to sort of say to sort of wrap up, or that you think is important to tell the listeners, I think, rather than me choosing one of the questions.
I think what's interesting for us, sort of talking across the globe, but also talking across different colonies in a way, the violence of colonialization and the kind of the wealth of indigenous knowledges which are, mostly relational ontologies, are really important. And several people have made the point that this idea of new materialisms is kind of a bit of a conceit, because for a lot of communities it's not new. They have been living this, or trying to live this relational way with the world, with the land, with nature, kind of against the push of extractive ideas of progress and development. So there's so much we can learn from one another, sharing from our different places. I think that's an important point I wanted to make.
Great, thank you, Teresa. There is a question from Lalu, which maybe we can, if you're happy to answer that now. Okay. So what other languages do you speak apart from English, Teresa?
Yeah, kuluma isiZulu katani kancane. I grew up. I have an Italian father, a Croatian mother, and I grew up in an English colony. And I can't speak Italian and I can't speak Croatian. Probably I did learn French at school, and that's pretty good. And when I went to DRC, I was quite glad that I had that. In Zimbabwe, I studied Shona, and I would love to keep that up, but it's not easy. Then I lived in KwaZulu-Natal for 5 years, and although I'd started learning Zulu when I was living in Bulawayo, because I'm sure you know that in Bulawayo, the language they call isiNdebele is actually Zulu, and they use Zulu dictionaries. If you study isiNdebele, you actually use Zulu material. So I started learning isiZulu in Bulawayo with a very good teacher. Then I moved to South Africa and lived in Joburg for a while, went to Pietermaritzburg, which is where I learned Zulu again. So that's the language that I've probably got the furthest with, but I am a beginner. I'm a long-term isiZulu beginner.
Okay, Teresa, I'm absolutely sad to cut you off at this point, because it's been just amazing and fascinating. But unfortunately, time is fleeting. So I think we'll move on. There are a few questions also on the chat, but we'll leave those until the end, and then we'll have a look at those. So I think we're gonna move into the panel now. And then go from there. So whoever's setting up the screen, if you can maybe stop the pictures and stop and just move, then we'll move into the next part. Okay, so welcome everyone to the second part, and I know that the first part has just been so great, and we probably needed about 3 hours to really give Teresa's work full justice. But we will move now into the next part, and the first thing that I'm going to ask is to ask all of the panel members just to very, very briefly, I know it's almost impossible, but if you can very briefly just introduce yourself in 30 seconds. And just because you're on my list at the top here, we'll start with Judith. Judith, if you can just introduce yourself very quickly.
Thank you, Carol. I'm Judith Denham. I am coming to you from Wajak Country in Western Australia, and I am a university academic and involved in teacher education. And my background, my discipline area is the arts, and I'm a practicing artist in that space as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Christine, next off the rank.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Hatton. I work at the University of Newcastle, where Carol used to work, and coming to you from lovely Awabakal country, the beautiful Lake Macquarie behind me. I am at the School of Education, and I'm a drama educator, and work with pre-service teachers. And I try, where possible, like a lot of arts people, is to do my research in the classroom with young people and children. So I'm probably amongst friends.
Great, thank you, Christine. You both doing really well. 30 seconds. Lalu.
Hello, my name is Lalu. I'm a citizen of the world, currently based in Makanda in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. I facilitate learning at the university currently known as Wits, as Rhodes. My interests are in translanguaging and arts across curriculum teaching, mainly around social justice.
Great, thanks, Lalu. Next, Richard.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Salas. I'm tonight coming to you from Jar Jar Warrungland in the Macedon Ranges in Victoria. I'm head of drama education at the University of Melbourne, and I also do research with Carol, particularly in the area of cultural and linguistic diversity.
Thanks, Richard. And Rachel.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Jacobs, she, her pronouns. I'm on Gadigal land here. So thank you very much. I acknowledge any Gadigal and any First Nations people here as well. Sovereignty was never ceded. I'm at Western Sydney University. I lecture in creative arts education. I work with migrant and refugee communities. I run my own Indian dance company, and I research in translanguaging education and the arts, decolonization through the body, and the anti-racist curriculum. Congratulations, Teresa, on the book launch as well. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Rachel. And last but definitely not least, Kai.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Kai Crooks Shisano, originally from Trinidad and Tobago, grew up in Brooklyn, New York, where I'm tuning in from right now. I arrived last night from Johannesburg, South Africa, where I live and work. I've held multiple roles, formerly an advisor for the United Nations, but currently I'm doing my research at the University of the Witwatersrand in the Drama for Life department. And my research, my PhD research, is on using drama and storytelling to support grade 6 learners with African linguistic repertoires. I love that phrase. In their spelling of English words. And I'm very happy to be here, especially tuning in from where I grew up, Brooklyn, New York. It gives me strength. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
And I'm very, very proud of Kai. I have to claim that she's one of my PhD students, who's just phenomenal and amazing. Thank you. Not that everyone else on the panel isn't phenomenal and amazing too. We've really got a great group of people. So we'll start with the second question, because the first was just the introduction, and that is, what for you are the links between the arts, knowing the world differently through the arts, and decolonial perspectives? Now, just to talk to the people who have who've joined us tonight, what I've told the panel is I'm going to just kick off with one or two people, simply just because, we need to get started in some way, shape or form, but that anyone else in the panel then would also, because everyone has much to say, I'm sure, about all of these questions. So anyone can then also contribute and add, and that's how we're going to work. So starting with Judith. question number 2.
Thank you. And I would just like to begin by congratulating Teresa on your book, and thank you for the interesting discussion thus far. There's so many ideas in there that I would be really excited to continue talking about. Just talking about languages, I'm currently learning Auslan, which is the Australian version of sign language. And I won't bother you, won't go into all the details about why I'm choosing to do this, but this is a language which is visual, and there is scope within that language to create elaborate versions or more visually engaging versions of words that you might use in a performance situation. So it's really quite an exciting exploration for me. It's I struggle with the amount of work I have to do, but there you go. And I'm just going to make a few points here, and I hope I'm not, telling people how to suck eggs, but these are things that I'm just engaged with at the moment. And the first thing is, of course, that because the arts sit in a cultural universe, I think they offer excellent opportunities for introducing young children to diverse cultural perspectives. Unfortunately, though, this can easily end up being a form of cultural tokenism or exoticization or misappropriation and so on. And in Australia, for example, you will often see, and it does my head in, but children are being shown Papunya paintings, which are inappropriately referred to as Aboriginal dot paintings, and then being encouraged to make their own Aboriginal dot paintings. So the point I think I want to make is that teachers are usually well-intentioned. I think that's the place to start. Yeah. But these poor practices will continue, and or good teachers will lose confidence and avoid the subject without clear and widely disseminated guidelines of protocols and resources for engaging with cultural materials appropriately. So I think there's maybe work to be done in that space, and to build those bridges for people. Of course, what we would expect is that students would be learning about the context and significance of the making of the artworks or of the artistic traditions within the origin culture. And they certainly should not be asked to mimic these artworks, but consider how they inform their own view of the world, would be my take on that. And the second point I'll make, because I am mindful of time, is that the nature of what I would call authentic arts education places children and their experience of the world at the centre of their learning. And I think this gives us some opportunities here, because we're interested in and give status to what children think, what they value, what they feel, and what matters to them. And many of our pedagogical practices, and I would say some of our signature pedagogies, really support us in this space. In the case, they also align in Australia to some work that's been done to create a guide for teachers, which is called the 8 Aboriginal Ways of Learning. And this is a classic example of where work has been done to provide teachers with that bridge into a space where they are trying to participate authentically. And this was developed by Aboriginal people and colleagues to guide teachers. But the Aboriginal ways of learning align, or I should probably say, our usual arts pedagogies align or sit really comfortably in this space around story sharing, visual thinking, working collaboratively, thinking laterally. And I think the other thing is to really hang on to the approaches to art education where we are engaging children in meaning making. This means that children bring their own context to their learning and they learn experientially. And look, I'm not saying all this works as we would like, But I do think that some of these ideas point to the fact that we have a space for forging decolonial intentions and creating culturally safe learning environments for the diverse cultures that are in our schools. And certainly in Australia, while it differs from school to school, we do have diverse children groups in school learning environments. And I'd just like to suggest, and I appreciate there are a number of drama people here, but examples, for example, practices such as process drama encourage children to have what we call a live-through experience when they're invited to explore the world by working in the shoes of another, like walking in another person's shoes. And I suggest that these types of opportunities to inhabit different roles and to experience diverse perspectives in improvisational type environments helps disrupt fixed positions and develop that empathy and different way of looking at the world that starts to facilitate some of those decolonizing processes. Mantle of the Expert is a form of process drama that some of you will be familiar with, that avoids a deficit model of early childhood by positioning children as experts who are commissioned to meet a brief, such as designing a playground. And finally, I'd say that another drama exploration method called story drama, which is based on children's books, stories books, means that if a teacher makes a conscious effort to curate books by a culturally diverse range of authors or books that present diverse family groups or diverse life experiences, there's the potential for children to meaningfully engage in embodied exploration of different perspectives as they develop the themes beyond the story in the book. And all of this is really just needs to be supported by reflection and review. So thank you. Those are just some thoughts I have.
Thanks so much, Judith. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to go on to, since we're talking in the drama terms, I'm going to go on to one of the many. Obviously, this panel is skewed because I am a drama person. So I apologize to. Although we do have quite a few visual artists here. Christine, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Judith. I don't need to talk about some of those strategies, so that's great. Look, when I reflected on the question as a prompt, I was, like you, Judith, I was thinking about the way my work has turned in the classroom in recent years. And maybe I come from an education background that where I've written work with Richard before, looking at gender and children's experiences, young people's experiences of creating performance and interrogating gender and diversity as part of that. So I guess in terms of my answer to that question, I hark back to my heart, my soul space, I guess, which is the radical intentions of art making and the need to have effective practices that invite young people to engage with the world around them and the world past and present and future. And so sort of drawing a thread from there, more recently, I find myself doing work that is in some ways a bit more problematic with the students, in the sense that I think that is the way the arts need to turn to support young people and children to be able to engage with incredibly complex landscapes and a dying planet. So Teresa, I was really interested in what you were talking about, because I've taken a bit of a post-human turn as well, sort of coming from post-structuralism then into the post-human and new materialist. And my work has been really looking at how to use drama, particularly because that's my specialism, how to use drama to activate what a great drama pioneer and professor in our field is Professor Dorothy Heathcote, who talked about activating the ethical imagination. And for me, I see that as being part of my pedagogical intention, but also part of the work of the artistic work with the children in a regular curriculum context. And so in recent times, I've been exploring the less researched and less taught signature pedagogy of hers, which was called Rolling Roll. And this is a fictionally dramatic inquiry where the children enter into an exploration of a fictional community. And in that, you can build into it the complexities and the tensions that operate in the real world. And of course, you know, it's really important when working with something as complex and as and also continuing an issue like colonization and settler colonialism. You know, you're working with concepts that should not fall on the shoulders of children to solve by any means, but you want them to engage empathically with their ethical imagination to understand some of the issues at hand. And I think drama offers a way for us to safely do that, because it's you know, we are entangled in a sense in the bubble of fiction. And so that fictional bubble can be crafted and is porous and can move and be manipulated so that the children feel safe to explore the ideas. So stuff that I've been looking at lately is looking at drama as a pedagogy of connection, where we can go from work where the children are learning about these issues and ideas and histories and futures, but they're looking at it within the context of the fictional frame. And so for me, particularly connecting this idea of how we can use that ethical imagination to be with one another in the problem, in the, you know, Donna Haraway's staying with the trouble, you know, this idea of how do we help them and guide them to be in that thick present, that thick moment of something that very much parallels the real world. And in fact, if they look outside, it's everywhere around them. They can see evidence of that. So the work for me has been not so much to be doing place-based work of going in on country, but really looking at, can we craft a drama that invites them to step into place in ways and stories in ways that are truly imaginative, so that they are safe there, but they can actually engage with that. So I've just done a project where they've been looking at the uninterrupted flights of bar-tailed godwits. We've used the migratory birds as being a focal point for a drama work that they did, where they created a fictional town. They became experts that were involved in that town. And then we looked back into the past. We looked at Indigenous caring for country. We looked at these fictional characters. We looked at the birds' needs, the way they do this uninterrupted flight, paralleled that with refugee experiences and this idea of what a sanctuary could be, and who has a right to a sanctuary. Now, for me, I was working gently with some really severe ideas about our own history in Australia. How do we help the children understand the way that place, space, story, culture have been violently manhandled since white invasion here? So, you know, using the drama to deal with something in a fictional present that allowed them some space to work with some very serious ethical dilemmas and cultural dilemmas, and to problematize the idea of being complicit. And I think that is the unsettling space that settler colonies like ours are having to work with, you know, and this idea of what Tuck and Wang call the haunting of that. And I'm not sure we're up to that yet in Australia. I think we got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Sorry, I rambled. I didn't actually.
No.
Okay.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. I know that Kai is champing at the bit to add to this question. So we'll move on to Kai.
Okay, thanks, Carol. I'll be brief. And the reason is when I reflected on this, so your question was, what are the links between the arts, knowing the world differently through the arts and decolonial perspectives? So I thought about this. And first of all, I want to congratulate Teresa on the book. I especially like the name of the book. And in the introduction, Carol, you referenced the digital divide. And I want to note that creativity is one of the top 4 skills that are needed for the 4th Industrial Revolution. Now that, along with complex problem solving, critical thinking skills, and integrative skills, but creativity, I was happy to see, was one. So for me, my artistic expression, going to that question, is my voice and my stories and my narrative. And the links between the arts and knowing the world differently through the arts and decolonial perspectives is that the arts, for example, from the work that I'm dealing with, for example, drama, narrative, storytelling, are expressions of our daily lives and the skills that we use to traverse these lives. It builds us as individuals. It builds our communities and our nations, and it's part of the awareness of the world around us, and it also mirrors us to our society and back and forth. I want to also reference a quote by Cecily O'Neill, which said, "Drama is a way of thinking about life and organizing and categorizing it." Again, focusing on the question. The first thing for me is to decolonize the arts, which means that art is not viewed as a high art, but indicative of the expressions of people, how people make meaning, how we know the world differently through the arts. It's narrative and inquiry, which connects arts education because the knowledge is generative, like the previous speakers have referenced. It happens through practice, so it's experiential and generative. Secondly, it's about decolonizing the curriculum. And decolonizing is disruption. You know, when we had the Fees Must Fall movement in South Africa, and this whole word of decolonizing came up, I had to actually go and look at it because I think that sometimes it's parlayed around and we need to have an understanding of what do we mean by that. So the need to decolonize, or when we speak of decolonizing the curriculum, it's because colonialism existed and we're dealing with the remnants and the reverberations of it today. So for example, in my context, regarding my research in South Africa, the curriculum and the language of learning and teaching continues to be Anglo-normative, with the dominant language being English, which is not the most widely spoken language in the country. Colonialism, as we know, is about the policy, the practice of taking over a country, taking over its resources, partly or wholly, and stripping the indigenous population of their right to govern themselves, to express themselves in their own language, culture, and customs. So decolonization can be viewed, and I'm talking about, my research is in South Africa, so it can be viewed as the Africanization of the curriculum, infusing an African worldview, which means our values and beliefs in the milieu that is largely colonial. It is the undoing of colonialism. And in referencing the curriculum, it was denuded of its Africanness. And that's why it needs to be decolonialized. I need to point out that decolonizing the curriculum is different from decolonizing the education system, which would then refer to looking at no-fee schools, infrastructure, access, etc. The next point that I'd like to make is the use of creative arts in schools as part of decolonization. Now, drama in the classroom, and some of our colleagues have spoken about this, drama, we use voice, we use our bodies, we use movement, it's participatory. And Teresa mentioned the symbolic thinking and interaction that takes place with children and how one thing can represent another. So there's need to foster where children learn from one another and sharing from different places. And my last point is regarding my particular research around in essay in the curriculum. Well, in essay, life skills is one of the subjects in the intermediate phase, and it includes the creative arts. And creative arts is very important because number one, it's experiential. Number two, learning can occur in multiple directions with the teacher, between teacher and learner, and parent. And the use of creative arts, which is for me critical, can be used towards developing better citizens. It nurtures resilience, authenticity, inclusion, and learning another's perspective and diversity. This whole issue of decolonization is extremely important to me. It's part of how I view life and how we need to detangle and untangle and get back our sense of self, and arts is critical to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Thank you so much. What I'm going to do is we are rapidly running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Rachel to pick any question and just talk a little bit, and then we'll go to Lalu, and then Richard. Sorry, I'm going to put you last on the rank. Okay, so Rachel, off you go.
No problem with my Auslan, Judith, also learning. I'm sickling 3. So I had by the way, deeply humbled to be on this panel who've already said, who really, in a nutshell, brought us to where we need to be in this conversation. One of the questions that caught my eye was, what is the impact of spaces being decolonized through the arts in damaged spaces? To pick up on Teresa's beautiful title used there. And I think the first thing is to recognize that damaged spaces are survival spaces, and they're spaces of resistance. And that's really important here, whether we're talking about my space, as South Asian resistors, or migrants and refugees that I work with, or our First Nations communities here, that it's resilience and resistance stories that make us not victims, but leaders. And so I'm currently doing some work about the ways that Western creativity research really devalues creativity in resistance and resilience and that's present in non-Western cultures. Back to the question about the impact of decolonization work through the arts. Well, it's absolutely huge. As long as it is systemic change and not around the edges. And as Kai has so beautifully mentioned, decolonization is a word that's getting bandied around a lot, and it's being some First Nations researchers now call it decol because it's being used so often, and it's been corrupted a bit in many ways. In some ways, it's become a metaphor for making things less white, or making a curriculum more just and things like that. And so we can't just talk about the things in isolation, like changing the texts that we study or changing the artists that we study, because all we're going to be doing is embedding our artists into oppressive systems, into white systems. And so they'll be devalued again. So I guess it's when we talk about shifting and shifting in leadership and the arts, shifting in leadership and education, disbanding oppressive structures such as the individual over the collective. When we talk about disbanding monolingualism, which is particularly pervasive in Australia. Sorry, I'm speaking from an Australian perspective, everyone. When we talk about disbanding the capitalist structures that make people compete over grant funding, you know, it's about actually elevating and advancing voices that are generally silenced by white systems. And the hardest part for me, Carol, and this is where everyone nods along and is like, yes, yes, tick, tick, I'm all with you. It is about the ceding of power, and the ceding of power from white artists, from white academics, from white systems, from white policymakers. And this is where people generally jump off with what I'm talking about. But the impact can be amazing, is that we start to undo some of the ravages of colonisation because systems don't heal themselves. We can't close the gap if our cultural preservation doesn't reflect the culture that's been here for thousands and thousands of years. And for our children, for the next generation, visibility is of course important, but Teresa so beautifully talked about going beyond representation and this is because this work is not just for racial minorities, it's for all of us. So often it's told for me, because I also do work in arts and media, you can't be what you can't see, and I'm on board with that most definitely. But we know what we can be, by the way. We've always known what we can be. My parents knew what we can be when they arrived with the one suitcase. My parents knew what they could be when they took control back over their country. Part of the reason what we're doing this is to show white children that their life experience isn't the norm, that their life story isn't shared by everyone, that is not dominant culture. And this is when, you know, we talk about, Judith so beautifully talked about diversity. So many good things have been said already. I should probably stop. But just to pick up on what Christine said, with what Tuck and Yang have reminded us always, that decolonisation is not a metaphor. It does need to be unsettling, as Chris mentioned, and it does need to be about the repatriation of land and of life. And it's not just a list of things that we need to improve. So we can't talk about this in isolation. I'm speaking from an Australian perspective, from land rights, from reparations, from treaties, from restorative justice, and from sovereignty. All of it is work around the edges until we address those things. We keep wondering why decades and decades of work around social justice and even in the arts is not working. And it's because that foundation has to be addressed if we're going to get anywhere with decolonisation.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Some amazingly important points, and done in such a succinct way, giving me some more time. Thank you. Okay, over to Lalu.
Thank you so much. I think I would like to take up on the word foundation that you just said, Rachel. I also like to echo the sentiments that have been said here. I agree with you 100%, Kai, especially when we have to also define some of these terms so that we can understand them. And something that I always found interesting around decolonial as a concept is how it can be seen as this broad term that may be seen as a rejection of Western European supremacy. But as we might know, well, at least in South Africa, we recently had the news of the Roman Catholic Church apologizing to the Canada Indigenous people for the abuses that happen in schools. So to me, it feels like these excuses will always come. So my voice might actually get to be a little bit harsh because I get very angry about these excuses. One of the excuses has to do with languages. And so, for example, Carol, you make me very sad when you say, after all this experience that you just shared, you can tell me that I speak little isiZulu. So when the question that I picked up is, how do we include, how do I pay attention to cultural, social, and contextual realities of your work? And so for me, communication is key. and especially from the onto-epistemological point of view, because many of us, our ways of knowing and being have actually been brutally, violently marginalized. And so I want to listen more, because I'm afraid that sometimes actually I might just be, you know, when you listen to a duplication of, because some of these things have been so recycled for so long, they are known for so long, that, and these are probably the right things to say. So coming from an applied theater background, I endeavor to listen more so that I can create that opportunities that for all the other people that I work with, I could hear more from them. So the reason why I also get a bit emotional, I want to call it emotional around languages, is because from my field, we tend to work with communities. And communities is a political term that I don't want to go into right now. But some of sometimes in South Africa, these communities never get to be named. And demographically, you'd find that it is actually white people that are working in Black communities. Some of them for as more like maybe even 15 years, for example. And if you ask them if they know the languages of the communities that they work with, the answer almost all the time is a little. The white people would go as far as saying Dumela or Sanbonani. These are just made in English, and I mean Sesotho and isiZulu way of greeting, Molweni in Xhosa, and goodbye, hello and goodbye. In essence, I'm not quite sure if my counterparts are aware of how the world actually begins to shift around the mode of language which they understand better, which is English. And the word, the English language in itself is so loaded with colonialism, it's loaded with trauma and pain, that I'm not quite sure how does it make it easier for any of the researchers, any of the people that work in communities to never really pay attention in that regard. I declare, one of the things that I look at is, I declare myself the most useless and the most useful person in a particular context. Because in my language, there's a saying that it can loosely be translated that a wise one learns all the time. I want to conclude by being inspired by the work of Viola Spolin, who actually argues that no one can teach anyone anything. We all learn by experience and by experiencing. And so that's why I feel like when language becomes this huge colonial project, I want to find ways through which I can bust it. And actually then I can bust English, I can bust Sesotho, I can bust any other language. And so then I find some solace in translanguaging and see how I can elevate artistic language, which is an expression that can enable all of us to say something. So Jon Begin said, I have learned that belief comes first and learning second. In my case, for years, I believed in the power of evidence, that facts matter, only to have to finally admit that no, often certain facts matter, those that support an already held belief. And the education system, I feel, is not doing us justice to be presenting us with certain facts and being blind or oblivion to the fact that it is supporting already held beliefs. I'm really grateful for being in the room and engaging in these discussions. Once again, I would also like to convey messages of congratulations, Teresa, because it is a journey that also opened us to see how through our emotions we can heal. And I'm looking forward to reading this book. But for any person who goes and works in communities for more than donkey years, always come back to say, actually, I can't. It pains me, especially in a country like South Africa that is so loaded with trauma and pain. But I think the arts can elevate and in many ways can heal, but only if we are willing. Thank you.
Lalu, Ndikonda isiXhosa, but I'm losing it fast in Australia, so I'll have to come back and practice in South Africa. Okay, and last but not least, Richard.
Thank you, Carol. And first of all, thank you, Teresa, again for your publication. And I also work with Sonia Arndt, so I know her work very well at the University of Melbourne. I agree with everything that's just been said. And of course, I mean, I work within a university which not only espouses language of colonisation and colonialism, but actually works in ways that perpetuate that. One of the things that I think is important to say about my own work, and I'm looking at the same question as Lalu, how do you pay attention to cultural, social, and contextual realities in your work? Well, I guess this comes from me and my drama background, but I put myself in the shoes of the students that I teach. And I think that there is very much an attitude in a lot of teaching at university that the students are there to learn from their lecturers. And I mean, one of the things that I think is so important to say about the arts education team at the University of Melbourne is that we all work very much together. And in fact, we have developed a space ontology for what we call our Studio 5 space, which is where the students come. It literally, we're very lucky, it literally is a floor full of different art spaces. And there are certain ways of seeing that space. It's an equitable space, it's an inclusive space, it's a diverse space. And that is something that our students know from the get-go when they come to that space. It's interesting that with that particular space, students from all over the university on social media have somehow found out about that space, and they will hang out in that space, even if they're not actually doing classes in arts education. I think the other thing to say too is that as a lecturer, one of the things that I've learned, and I think this has been a journey for me, but it's certainly something that has come to me in recent times, is that you need to be humble. You need to be, I know it's a well-worn phrase, but you do need to be a lifelong learner as well. And you actually need to learn from your students. I think particularly with COVID, we have a lot of our students who are actually offshore at the moment and are not actually in Australia, and yet they're trying their very best to study. And then we've also got students who are in Australia at the moment who have not seen their families overseas for a couple of years and are aching to get back home. But at the same time, they're still continuing with their university work, and certainly to empathise with those students and what they're going through and what they actually bring, how they even get themselves into our classes when we can run them in a physical space, I think it is quite remarkable. And I think one of the things that I've learned about arts education, which is the wonderful thing, is that we can trouble ideas, and we can also create a space where our students feel comfortable. It's a welcoming space. And I think the other thing that I want to say about our own First Nations people is that one of the things that we've noticed from our own students, and these are mostly, when I say students, these are mostly people who will go on to be arts teachers or to be generalist early childhood or primary teachers. But they have a real thirst for looking at the perspectives of First Nations people in their work in the future. And they're looking to their lecturers as role models for the way that they will teach themselves when they're in front of a class in the future. And so I think one of the great responsibilities that lecturers in arts education have is that we do need to be those role models. We do need to be the guiding light for our students, and our students can certainly smell bad teaching when they see it. And I think that's something that is a real challenge for us all. And they can see when people are not being genuine and are not really cognizant with the latest ideas and teaching in the area. And I think I'll just sort of finish by giving you an example of what I mean by that. And as you heard from many of the Australian people this evening, it's customary now to give an acknowledgement of country at the start of a meeting such as this, but also in our classes and in our meetings at university. The best advice that I got from my colleague Melita Hogarth, who is one of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learning and teaching advisors in my faculty, is it's better to actually put that acknowledgement of country into your own words and be genuine than to read it off a piece of paper and be mechanical. And I think that's probably where I'd like to finish in terms of there's a genuineness that we have to bring to our work as well.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely flippin' amazing, but we're actually dead on time for 5 minutes of questions. So that's really great. So if there's anyone in the audience that either wants to refer us to one of the chats questions, or just put your microphone on and ask any questions, that would be great. Oh, Rachel.
Carol, can I just add a response to a question here to acknowledge Alethea Beeston, who's a Kabi and Wiradjuri woman who was going to join us tonight. So somebody has asked about First Nations representation. Alethea is a force of nature in the arts, a field leader, and has an amazing quote that said that devaluing of the arts in this country started in 1788. So I just wanted the audience to know that she's unable to be here, but the intention and her spirit is definitely here.
Yeah, just unfortunately it happened that she had an emergency that at the last minute, so she couldn't be here, which was really sad for us, because you know, I specifically asked her to be here because of her amazing work and her amazing you know, understanding of First Nations. But anyway, we will hopefully we'll have seminars or webinars in the future that we can then you know, tap into her expertise as well. So thank you, Rachel, for mentioning that.
Carol?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something that I forgot to put in the mix, mainly because for us in South Africa, I mean, like, let me just start by saying that Teresa mentioned the digital divide. And for us in South Africa, there's a huge embracing of 4IR. If 2 years ago, when the matric results were announced, our Minister of Basic Education was actually accompanied by Pepper, which is the world's first humanic robot. And so right now we have Ms. Zora. And for me, when I talk about language, these are moments for conceptual engagement, because of course these robots get to be fed information and content through us. And so I tend to find that sometimes conversations around decoloniality may be oppositional and contradictory, and sometimes may be frustrating. And I'm wondering in what ways actually we can move towards a unifying voice towards our shared future. And I'm wondering how for the fourth industrial revolution, for example, how do we communicate with Ms. Zora in such a way that conceptually ideas are embedded? I have this image that I learned recently of threading. And as you're threading this beautiful thing, sometimes you prick yourself, and it's in the pricking that, you know, there's a little bit of hurting, there's blood coming out. The easier thing would be to point out like maybe whatever, but a true artist, I would want to believe, would actually continue to thread despite all these pricking and paining that goes along. And so in as far as I appreciate our critical engagement on the topic, I also want to find out in what ways can it be a tool towards unifying us for our desired education landscape, our desired future, at least for the best interest of the child.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an enormously important question. If anyone else wants to respond to that, I've got my response, but I'm the chair, so somebody else answer.
Well, can I just jump in? And Lalu, it is a great question with a few minutes, so just very quickly. It goes to one of the questions you were to pose, Carol, which talked about the inclusion of marginalized communities in decision-making processes. And the first thing I said was, the response is intentionally, right? So we do that intentionally by including them and encouraging their participation in the arts, which evokes multiple meanings. I think that when we consult and when we design, there is, I don't know if it's subconscious or not, an exclusionary process that happens. Take, for example, Lalu, in South Africa, where you and I are both working, in a classroom, the majority of learners do not speak the same language. We must be very cognizant of that. So it's important to frame our interventions so that they are inclusive. And it reminds me of the constructivist theorists who suggest that children are not empty vessels, but rather astute thinkers and language learners, which means that they are able to contribute also from their own points of view. One of the speakers, I think either Christine or Judith spoke before of Mantle of the expert. We have to create a very creative classroom that fosters imagination, problem solving, openness, and embodied learning. And that, for example, we get through MOE. But it goes back, I want to refocus when you talk about 4IR, Lalu, because 4IR, again, one of the 4 pillars is creativity. And I'm saying that we have to include those that we normally do not include. And we do that by doing it intentionally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Is that a signal?
The train was about to arrive.
So this discussion is just getting started.
I know. We'll have to have another webinar, Philip.
Unfortunately, we do have to bring this to a close. So I'm going to end, but first I'd like to leave the final words to Carol to say a few words, and then I will bring everything to a close. To everyone's staying with us till the very end, we will end in about 4 minutes. I'll try to get us out of here in about 4 minutes. So Carol, I think we'll give you the last word, and then I will summarize.
I always like to have the last word, Philip, so I'm happy to do that. I actually, you know, it's really sad that often in these kinds of webinars, just when we're getting to this sort of crunch, you know, time is over. But you know, I think that's what is the good thing about an organization like IACAT, is that constant flow and dialogue between people from different, you know, parts of the world. And that, you know, I would hope to continue these conversations. And hopefully we will be able to, through some more seminars. And I'm very, very happy with the panel as it is. You know, I'm sad that Alethea couldn't join us, but overall, you know, I'm just so privileged to know so many amazing, you know, experts, and I'm really, really happy about that. But I do think that one of the major issues with some of these webinars is that we tend to get the academics and the researchers and everyone, you know, who makes a really good contribution, but it's a pity that we can't get more of the voices of the people, and that's probably what I would really like to see in another webinar in the future. Keeping and maintaining the conversations with all of you, but also trying to find you know, more grassroots, for want of a better word, people to get involved in the discussion. But thank you, all of you. I really appreciate it. I was a bit nervous this afternoon, wondering if people were all going to pitch and so on, but it's been absolutely superb. And I look forward to another discussion at a later point.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you to our distinguished panel. This really is just the very beginning. And on behalf of IACATE, I do want to say thank you to everyone who has come out and has joined us. And this is one of those topics. I often say there are a number of topics that you can't just address in one sitting. They're lifelong learnings and lifelong explorations. And without a doubt, this affects our entire globe, how we teach a betterment and empowerment, moving away from systems of oppression. So I will share, we will be suggesting to the IACATE and to the Creative Arts Open Access Journal that we do a special edition and around this topic. And I'm almost certain they will agree, and we'll be able to continue the dialogue with all of our panelists and bring in other voices. So with that said,
you notice how Philip said he's going to give me the last word.
Oh no, I said I will take the last word and summarize. Talk about system. So with that said, the chat really heated up nicely. I hope people were looking at that. And I would like to close by just sharing a few words that Jody Honan shared to everyone. Sorry that I didn't get a chance to read more from the chat, but I think this captures just a brief essence of that how and what do we do with each other. So she says, learning to speak words of another language correctly, the different soundings and ways of holding your mouth and tongue, how we hold this. It is an act of deep listening and hence empathy. And this can change us, it can change our brain and our thinking too. And I'll add, it can connect us. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of IACATE, go to our website, check out how you can become involved. Thank you, panelists. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue further. Bye, everyone.